It's no secret that from the Pro Tour and other events, including a lot of online chatter from content creators who play a lot of Standard, that Standard was in a bad spot. That means the ban and restriction announcement from yesterday was coming in hot. People were excited, and it delivered. It delivered far better than most people expected, having Corey Steelcutter banned, Abulo's Awakening banned, Monstrous Rage, Heartfire Hero, Up the Beanstalk, Hopeless Nightmare, and The Town Ain't Big Enough all banned. An absolute nuclear bombing of the current Standard metagame, like a machine gun fire of ban hammers. A crazy announcement. And personally, I was enjoying Standard for a little while and then got a bit sick of getting absolutely run over by Mono Red and Blue Red Prowess as well, so I sort of dipped out again. This is exciting. I actually played some Standard on Arena today for the first time in weeks, and it felt good seeing people play different things on the ladder. Might even put out some Standard gameplay later in the week. But this is such a seismic, huge and drastic change, it does ask some very important questions. For example, is it healthy for us to have such significant bans? The rotation's only coming a month from now. Is this the correct thing to see in the Standard format? Well, the obvious answer to that is yes. In this circumstance, things were so bad that we needed bannings. Absolutely. I don't think many people are going to disagree with that, although I will try to give a voice to the few people that did disagree with that. But the point is, the fact that we had to have these, the fact that these are a necessity, is not a great look for the supposed like flagship competitive format of Magic. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about ban culture and Magic's relationship with bans, whilst also talking about each individual card and why they got banned. So I think that's also fascinating from a game design enthusiast and competitive player perspective. But first, I need to tell you about Aleksi Birclot's legendary Playmat Kickstarter that's going right now. They've even sent me one of these to show off. This is the Thoughtseize playmat. This is a full playmat featuring the original art of Thoughtseize. That's right, the one that we, the old heads know and love. The important thing about the playmat is that it has extended art. It has art that was never originally in the frame, done by Aleksi himself. This is a sponsored segment, a sponsored section, I'll be very clear on that. But how could I turn down promoting this? It's so good. Look at this. Thoughtseize, Sliver Hive Lord, Venser Shaper Savant, Avenger of Zendikar, and Vraska the Unseen, and Angel of Serenity. You cannot pick some more iconic creatures. I guess some people might even argue some of these cards are newer iconic creatures, which is funny because some of these cards are like 15 years old and I'm an old man. As of time of recording, there's still 30 days to go and we're a bit of a way off from getting the full lot backed. So if you want to get involved and get some stitched, beautiful, gorgeous playmats featuring art from Aleksi Birclot, you can do so by going to the link in the description below, and it helps support the show as well. I'm going to start by going through each of the cards and why they're banned, and then just wax lyrical a little bit about the nature of bannings themselves. Corey Steelcutter is an insane Magic the Gathering card. It's an equipment that creates a body when you cast the second spell for your turn, and it recurs that, doing it over and over again. I've compared it in the past, as many have, to Monastery Mentor, because it is a value engine that creates more and more bodies the longer you have it around. It is cheap at 2 mana, and then it inexplicably also gives the creatures that it creates and attaches to haste and trample, making combat very difficult against it too. The main reason it's such a pain in the backside for most decks to deal with is that you can never ever favorably trade with this. You can't exchange one card in your hand for the Corey Steelcutter, because usually the opponent has cast the Corey Steelcutter, then cast another spell. And there you go, you've now got a trigger and a monk. So you're always left behind when trying to trade into a very cheap and aggressive card, which is not ideal. Traditionally speaking, when you're looking at aggro decks should not be getting card advantage out of their cards, because it makes it very hard for mid-range decks to even play into them. That's why the mono black and the black X mid-range decks have all but disappeared prior to this banning. So that's why, again, Sheldrin, which was a boogie woman of the format for a while, hardly gets talked about, because she normally appears in those kinds of decks. That's what I'll talk about in a moment. Demons might be one of the big winners from this. The card is incredibly pushed, and it's probably the most obviously broken of the cards on here, although everyone missed it during previous season as well. Everyone was like, is this good? And now it's seeing play in Pioneer and Modern as well. The card is cracked, and I'm glad to see it gone. It was the titular card of the previous Pro Tour, even if the win rate for Blue Red Tempo was actually sub 50%, but everyone was playing the Prowess deck, right? This card was too good, and it's a good job that it's gone. Abulo's Awakening is a 4-mana sorcery with an X cost that never gets paid, which puts in a non-aura enchantment from your graveyard onto the battlefield and puts some counters on it. It becomes a 1/1 spirit with flying in addition to other types. Basically, you cast this and target Omniscience, put Omniscience into play, and then you start just chaining off and going absolutely hog wild. There are cards in Dragonstorm that allowed you to like draw multiple cards from your deck alongside once you had the Omniscience in play, and thus Dragonstorm really powered up this deck too. Abulo's Awakening is very good at basically being a cost reducer for the worst or most powerful enchantment in the format, right, which is Omniscience. So Bull's Awakening means that for 4 mana, as long as you put the Omniscience in your bin, you're getting a very, very cheap Omniscience. Now, people would argue that Omniscience might be the one to go, because Omniscience is in original Foundations, which means that it's going to be in the format for like 5 years or whatever the Foundations legality is, which is a problem, because people will argue that Omniscience might come back later down the line. The truth be told, though, it's very rare that Wizards of the Coast ever print a reanimation spell at 4 mana. Bull's Awakening is an unusually good reanimation spell. I guess it's got that narrowness of only hitting non-aura enchantments that they thought would be good, but then they went and printed Omniscience into Foundations, so I don't really know what they were thinking with that combo. I guess they were thinking, they just didn't notice. That's one of the problems here, is that testing is probably a little bit lapsed, shall we say. I don't think we'll see as cheap of a recursion spell for other permanents or enchantments in the future. I think getting rid of Bull's Awakening makes more sense because Abulo's eats up space. What I mean by that is that if you ban Omniscience, sure, Omniscience is gone and you can't break Omniscience further down the line. But if you leave Abulo's Awakening in the format, which will be in the format for less time, granted, but it's more likely to get broken again if they print another splashy 7, 8, 9, or 10 mana enchantment in another set, which they are likely to do. So it's a design space that Wizards of the Coast like to cater for because combo players love it, and big, is it Timmy's who likes big splashy enchantments? I don't know. So I actually prefer the Abulo's banning over the Omniscience. I just think that putting Omniscience into Foundations and having it in Standard for 5 years was a strange choice, at least from a perspective of keeping Standard interesting. Monstrous Rage, the 1 mana red cantrip that gives a permanent +1/+1 trample buff and +2/+0 temporarily. The best pump spell ever printed. This card is absolutely cracked in half, and I don't think they ever realized how cracked in half it was. It is a pump spell that also plays into the enchantment role mechanic of the set that it was in, which is Wilds of Eldraine. That's a common thing you'll see, is cards that do a thing that already exists, but they actually have the set mechanics trapped onto them. In this case, that set mechanic, the one they picked, the monster roll, gives trample. I'm not sure if this is ever designed to be constructed playable. Probably of all the uncommons on this list, it probably was the one that was most considered for that. But essentially, to quote Brian Kibler and crib from his video again, it makes combat borderline pointless. Like, there's no reason for you to block. You can't really block because the creatures you're blocking will just randomly have trample. Corey Steelcutter is also a bit of that as well. Red getting trample incidentally on its like best equipment and its best pump spells is just really bizarre. So it takes blocking out of the equation and makes it not really much of a game. You just die. We saw this a little bit as well with Embercleave when that was in Standard. Double strike plus trample out of nowhere. It was kind of like Splinter Twin off the top rope. It was kind of crazy. I'm glad to see this go. This card also played very well with Vivi, who gets to stay in the format, because Vivi wasn't really, Vivi didn't blow up in the same way that I thought it would or said it would. I made a video talking about how Vivi was going to be the strongest thing at the Pro Tour, or one of the strongest things at the Pro Tour. It was the most played Final Fantasy card, so I still stand by that Vivi was the best called shot for what's going to happen at the Pro Tour. And Monstrous Rage plays very well with Vivi, so this helps to keep Vivi in check, perhaps. I still think we'll be talking about Vivi in a year or two. We'll come back to that later, I guess, in a video down the line. The other combo with Monstrous Rage was Heartfire Hero, the best 1 mana red creature in the format. It has Valiance. When you target it, it grows. When it dies, it deals damage to each, equal to its power to each opponent, giving it a bit of commander power too. It was part of the mouse package that a lot of people argue that if we got rid of Monstrous Rage, the mouse package would be too good. So it's cool to see Wizards of the Coast actually delete the mouse package too. Or should I say one part of the mouse package. There's perhaps an argument that mice might still stay around with Manifold Mouse and other mouse-related payoffs, but without Heartfire Hero, that's unlikely, which kind of leads to them being, what's the word I'm looking for, like, pseudo-banned. And it's interesting that they decided to literally ban the uncommon one, not the rare one, which, if you're a bit of a conspiracy theorist, you could say that Arena is now going to give you some uncommon wildcards for this, and not rare wildcards for the 2-drop one. Either way, the mouse package has been weakened, and Red has lost again one of its valuable, powerful 1-drops that not only has like powered up prowess, but also has a way to burn face as whilst it's beating if it were to die. Again, the idea of getting 2-for-1s out of your red cards being not the traditional way that mono red normally plays. It makes the decks more fragile in a sense that they don't just get to have a beta that also burns face. Traditionally, RDW decks have like creature-based strategies and burn-based strategies, and then they sort of like meet in the middle. Prowess, I guess, kind of is the meeting in the middle of this. So this means that the decks probably are a bit more fragile in the sense that creature's dying doesn't allow them to just one-shot you. Again, there's a situation where Heartfire Hero, much like the Trample on Monstrous Rage and Corey Steelcutter, made combat into a pointless endeavor because you block and then you just just die anyway, which is not really the best way to make the counterplay available and the agency to the opponent sitting opposite the red decks. Up the Beanstalk is the absolute go-to example of a tentpole uncommon for limited. It's there to help you play with spells that cost more than 5 in the limited environment, one of the sub-themes of Wilds of Eldraine. And then it draws you a card when it enters, and it draws you a card when you do that. But unfortunately, in every set around it, including stuff that went into Modern with the Evoke Elementals, it allows you to draw cards off of things that are being played for free, or for alternate costs, or for cheaper. Things with domain cost reduction, like Leyline's Binding, for example. This led to Up the Beanstalks getting banned in Modern, and now banned in Standard. The only place that it sees any prominent play, I believe, now will be Pioneer and Legacy as a prominent sort of fringe play, and they'll continue to have a life in those formats perhaps, although I can imagine as more and more free spells get printed that perhaps one day we see this banned in Pioneer too. The problem with Up the Beanstalk is that it allows the ramp decks just to draw more cards than you, so they're not even spending their cards to ramp up to their big stuff, they're just playing their big stuff, often cost reduced, and drawing cards, and thus they're not using half their deck to get to the payoff. The half the deck that they're using to get to the payoff gets refunded through the card draw. And then, if you want to interact with Up the Beanstalk, the interaction element, similar to Corey Steelcutter, is a bit mute, because you've played Up the Beanstalk and you draw a card, your opponent then blows it up with, I don't even know what the enchantment blowing up cards are in the current set. Haywire might still see some play, I guess. Well, that's rotating next month anyway, with the release of Edge of Eternities, I believe. Either way, you blow it up with your one card, trying to get a 1-for-1, and they've already drawn a card. Hell, if it's in the middle to late game, they've drawn 2 cards off of it, and you just can't go neutral with this. And not all cards have to be gone neutral with, but if it's this kind of thing that draws you, as a minimum, 1 card before getting blown up, or as a normal situation, draws you 5 to 10 cards over the course of a game, it becomes a value engine that you just can't beat, and it made those decks too good. Of course, there is the argument that Beanstalk wasn't that good in face of mono red or blue red, and I'll come to that in a moment, because that's kind of why they're doing this. They're neutering like the top 4 to 5 decks with all these bans, trying to kind of reset the metagame and not make it so that when red disappears, another thing just jumps into its place and becomes 50% of the metagame. And on that note, the Esper Pixie deck that didn't really show up that much at the Pro Tour has had 2 cards removed from it. So Esper Pixie, or Esper Bounce, or Esper Hand Reset, no one calls it that. Anyway, the Esper deck that likes to put things back in its hand was playing Hopeless Nightmares as a way to attrition your opponent out, where you put it into the battlefield, the opponent discards a card, loses 2 life, you put it back into your hand via self-bounce and flicker effects, and then you replay it to get the effect again, over and over and over. A very frustrating card to play into when it's going off, if I'm honest. This town ain't big enough for the both of us, or that's not the full card name, but I can't help but say that, is one of the ways to enable this. You would bounce your own Hopeless Nightmare, and one of their things, getting a big tempo play against the Omniscient decks, or against the Leyline's Binding decks, or even the burn decks or Corey Steelcutter decks. Yeah, it was very good at giving you some advantage whilst also resetting and repowering up your ETP effects as well. Again, it's like Up the Beanstalk, and I guess Hopeless Nightmare is similar. These cards probably weren't designed for competitive play, or at least competitive constructed play. These cards were built around the draft environments in which they existed and were printed, and then they just happened to interact in ways that were so favourable that they become linchpin parts of decks that were bordering on oppressive, or in the case of mono red or blue red, prowess were literally oppressive. So we had mono red and prowess get hit by these things, and then they hit the Beanstalk deck and Esper self-bounce as well, which I think is a smart thing to do. One of the arguments was that if you remove certain things like Monstrous Rage, the mice continue to be a problem, or if you remove multiple things from red, the Esper Pixie deck begins to be a problem. The issue here is that they have, quite rightly, and I quite like the approach, just neutered a load of stuff. They've trimmed stuff, they trimmed the fat, if you will, that is the frustrating part of the format, away prior to rotation to give us a month of very fresh and new and interesting format, get people like myself to update Arena and play, or go to a local store to play. There are 2 issues with that, though. I have to ask the question, does that mean that other decks will just rise to the top? There's always a best deck. For example, the Black Demons deck didn't get hit at all, which can also play Shoulder in the mix. The Roots deck that I really like, that deck did not get hit at all either, so that might be one of the prominent decks now. There are murmurings that Red Black Lizards is just the next best aggro deck and is better than most things in the format too. So maybe Red Black Lizards now becomes good, and those people who are mocking the inclusion of Jasper Flint as a organized play promo will have to eat crow. It'll be interesting to to see if just other decks rise up to have a similar metagame share and become a similar frustration for content creators and players alike. I think the majority of the community are happy about this. When you look to like the social media reaction, content creator talking, viewership and player numbers, I imagine will reflect this in a couple of days as more people are checking out their favorite streamers on Twitch again, watching YouTube content on Standard. Hell, people are probably just going to make more YouTube content on Standard again. I do have to ask the question though, again, is this healthy? Does this help paper Magic? And that's a really important one. It's paper Magic, because the digital Magic, it's exciting because you get your wildcards back for the most part, not always. Let's not get on the fucking, was it Luminarch Aspirant that they absolutely fucked me on when they fixed that, but that's long gone now and I'm never getting those wildcards back. But largely you get your wildcards back and you have an exciting time. If you're a creator like myself, you've got a lot of wildcards and a good collection as well, so you get to have an exciting time playing the new stuff. But like Standard needs to kind of exist in paper too, right? It's one of the tentpole things holding up a secondary market and a desire for new cards and the desire to open new packs. It's one of the points pointed out to Final Fantasy that it's surviving on collector hype alone because most of the cards aren't good enough to compete with the stuff that was banned here or stuff that's currently illegal in Standard anyway. Bans used to be earth-shattering. Back when Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge were banned, that was a huge thing. Like, it was 6 years since the last bannings. Prior to that, Standard was dominated by the Affinity deck, which led to, in 2005, Arcbound Ravager, Disciple of the Vault, and the Artifact Lands all getting banned out of the format because player attendance at events was down drastically. People had given up playing. 6 years later, Stoneforge, Mystic, and Jace did the same thing in the Core Blade era. Again, attendance was down. People didn't want to play or go to local stores anymore. So the cards got banned out in the hope to rejuvenate Standard, and it kind of worked. It took 6 more years before Emrakul: The Promised End, Smuggler's Copter, and Reflector Mage all got banned in January 2017. And then at that point, things just sped up. We just got more and more bans. The April of that year was Felidar Sovereign. June was Aetherworks. 4 cards in the January of 2018 with the Tune with Aether, which is a fucking Lay of the Land variant with the set mechanic strapped on top. It's that card again that was designed for the limited environment, but ended up just being a linchpin in one of the best decks in the format that was gobbling up the metagame percentage share. 2019 was Field of the Dead, and then Oko, and then Once Upon a Time in Veil of the Summer at the same time. Agent of Treachery and Fires in 2020. Then we had Cauldron and similar in August, in September. Omnath the following October, and I'm skipping over cards here, and I'm missing some out, and I'm jumping ahead, and like, look, I'm not going through the whole history of Standard bans. That's not that useful, and I've done it in the past. The point of me going through that is that once upon a time we had 6-year gaps, and now we have a semi-regular ban cadence. Actually, I think we've had a year of no bans, which is unusual now. It's almost like nature was healing, like the balance was restored. So, was Standard better at one point? Were there just 6-year periods when nothing was broken or gross? I don't think so. There's a period when like Unburial Rites, Thragtusk, and Restoration Angel were dominant forces that pissed a lot of people off, but people metagamed against it and played around it, and there were decks that beat it as well. Hell, they also created cards that kind of hated out those things. Lifebane Zombie being a good example of this. Scavenging Ooze also existed in the same format as Unburial Rites for all of about 5 minutes. It was a very late addition to the format, but that was one of their old plans, was to print cards that effectively neutered some of the best stuff. There's a lot of -1/-1 hate in the sets that came after Lingering Souls, for example. But history proves that that's not always that good or good enough or soon enough. So, is banned the next best thing? I've made a video recently talking about how I'd actually rather they experimented and pushed power levels in some ways and did more interesting things with Magic and then had to ban than didn't do those things, and we had boring formats with not very exciting cards. But again, going back to paper attendance used to be down when there was like no digital. And now we do have the digital content creation sort of like ecosphere of Twitch and YouTube as well. People playing on Arena every day. That's got to be a reasonably big money source for Wizards because the whale's buying in. But again, are Standard players going to want to keep buying decks if A, they're banned out from under them, or B, they have to wait for a pseudo-rotation ban period to come back to the game? It just seems like a very messy way of doing it. Like, the ideal would be that we would never have these bans, right? Is that an impossible ask? I think these bans were correct. I genuinely do. I'm excited for the format, and I think it's going to bring the majority of people back. But I'm not sure if it's healthy for the long term of the game if we keep having to do this. And the other fear is that we do this, and other decks just rise up to be the exact same thing, and then we call for more bans, and then there'll be like a downward cycle of bans. There is an argument that there's always a best deck, and there is an argument that people need to learn the metagame and adjust to defeat it and beat it, which we kind of saw at the Pro Tour where the majority of Blue S Prioress decks didn't translate. They didn't convert, although the finals had Blue Red Prioress in it. I've just got a mixed feeling about it, basically. Like, I agree with the bans, but this can't be the correct way to manage the format that we want people to adopt in paper. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I've been the sweatiest Vince you've ever seen at peak summer in the UK, and this video was brought to you by... Well, they never planned for this video, but it's the video I used to make today, and I wanted the spot today. Legendary Playmats by Aleksi Birclot. Link in the description below. Go check it out, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta for now.